In this video, we are talking about the results of a biopsy. And so we're going to talk about random needle biopsies, targeted biopsies, but most importantly, we're talking about cores positive. So does it matter if a core is 5% positive, 80% positive? What type of prostate cancer is it? We just want to give more clarity to those results for those of you who are now encountering this for the first time and help you understand the information. So we're going to talk to Dr. Mark Scholes. He's a 30-year medical oncologist who is focused solely in prostate cancer across his career. And we're going to learn about biopsy cores today. So in today's video, we are talking about biopsy cores. So these are the little, samples that they get from the prostate. It is done through a needle biopsy. And typically, needle biopsies are anywhere from 12 to 14 cores. We talk about targeted biopsies from 1 to 3 cores or 4 if necessary. But this can be a time when someone's undergoing a biopsy for prostate cancer or any type of cancer. This could be a time of a lot of anxiety and just concern because what is the results going to be and what do they mean? And then you get these things that come back on a biopsy report and it comes back as positive. And that's not a positive situation when something comes positive. So now you're even changing the definitions and the meanings and it can be very confusing. So let's just talk about the cores itself. The prostate, they kind of do on a random needle biopsy, the cores are in a grid pattern. And then they come back as positive or not positive. And then they talk about the percentage of positive if it is indeed present as far as prostate cancer goes. So can you just break down maybe the Gleason score first so we can kind of understand how this process goes? Because I think that just even getting a result from a doctor, he'll just sometimes look at you and tell you, you have prostate cancer. Let's get you to treatment. I can do surgery in 2 weeks. And that doesn't even begin to describe the situation.
Well, the reason this is all important in prostate cancer is because of this huge spectrum of one word to describe harmless stuff at one extreme and life-threatening stuff at the other extreme. Where you fit in that continuum of harmless to life-threatening is determined by the biopsy in most cases. Now we have PSMA PET scans that also are very helpful. Prostate cancer prognosis and making these determinations of low, intermediate, and high risk is founded in accurate interpretation of the biopsy. The information from the biopsy has to do with the grade, the appearance of the cells. Are they angry, aggressive-looking cells? And there's ways to, it's not just a subjective, there's a methodology to determine that. Or are they harmless, happy-looking cells that are never going to spread? And so that's the grading system of 6 to 10 if it's Gleason, or 1 to 5 if it's an Epstein system, the higher numbers meaning greater propensity for metastasis. Beyond the grade being the most important part, is how much cancer is there. And these random biopsies were useful in ascertaining how much cancer is in the prostate. Is it a large tumor or a small tumor? By using a grid pattern, the doctors would map out is it all on the right side, or is it toward the top or toward the bottom? Is it on both sides? And then when the needles go in, they go in about 1 inch into the prostate. How much of that core is full of cancer? Imagine if someone had 12 cores taken and every single core is full of cancer versus another gentleman that had 12 cores taken and only 1 core is 10% involved. Those are the two extremes. Complete engulfment of the whole prostate with prostate cancer versus a very tiny little area seen and detected on a single core. And then everything in between. So it's not only how many cores have cancer in them, but how robust is the cancer in the core. Is it a 10% of the core cancer and 90% is prostate gland? Or is it 90% is cancer and 10% is prostate gland? This was an indirect way to get a sense of tumor volume, and larger tumors had a greater propensity for metastasis than smaller tumors. This information now can be often obtained with a good MRI. And I've steered away from doing random biopsies for many years because the very information that we are looking for and obtaining from a random biopsy, which I used to rely upon heavily in getting a sense of not just the grade, but the size of the tumor, is immediately available and even more accurate through an MRI than it is through a random biopsy. I am not doing any more random biopsies, haven't been doing them for 10 years, but patients will discover that they're still very popular in the industry, and random biopsies are considered the standard default approach to doing biopsies.
So we mentioned a couple things here. You're talking about the Gleason score, which is, 6 to 10, and then the Epstein score being 1 to 5. With the Gleason score system, this is, I think some pathology reports come back with both nowadays. You'll kind of see both numbers, but let's break down into the Gleason score real quick. When we talk about cores positive, they're not going to see a 6 or a 7 or an 8 or a 9 or a 10. They're going to see a 3, a 4, or a 5 as far as what type of prostate cancer is present within that tissue sample. And then we break down, which number is first and what percentage. So can you kind of break down what you see when you look at a pathology report and you see that those cores come back with some 3, some 4, some 5?
So when we say the Gleason score is from 6 to 10, it's because the doctors uniformly look at the presence of whether or not there's 2 different types of cancer. So there's 3 basic types labeled 3, 4, and 5. 1 and 2 disappeared many years ago because they don't metastasize. So it's 3, 4, and 5. But what if the doctor under the microscope can see both 3 and 4? And how is he going to report that? Well, they use an equation, 3 plus 4, 3 being the more common variant seen, 4 being the less common variant seen, equals 7. So there's always a summation of 2 numbers. If there's pure 3 throughout the gland, it'll be 3 plus 3 equals 6, and thus 6 being the lowest number that you can obtain. So 6 to 10, 5 plus 5 is 10, 3 plus 3 is 6, and then you can get different permutations in between.
Before we continue this video, I just wanted to remind you that we do have an in-person conference coming up in September, and you can learn more at pcri.org/conference. Also, if you would like to support us financially, you can do so at pcri.org/donate, and that helps us get these videos out to prostate cancer patients all over the world. And you could also click the subscribe button because that's a great way to support us as well. Now back to my conversation with Dr. Scholes. One of the things you said is that, 1 and 2 went away a long time ago because we know they don't metastasize. 3 doesn't metastasize either. So why hasn't 3 gone away?
It should. This is an unfortunate hangover from policies, and experts have discussed eliminating the 3 and no longer calling it cancer. It has never been shown to metastasize. It doesn't behave like a cancer. So it brings a lot of confusion, unfortunately, and the industry has just been very slow to adapt to these new realities.
And going a little further into that, it used to be called watchful waiting, and they would kind of wait for things to creep up a bit, where active surveillance is a lot more active. You're sitting there getting MRIs every year, and then getting PSAs every 6 months, and really monitoring the cancer. Is it true that 50% of all prostate cancers are Gleason 6?
Yes. So we have about 200,000 men diagnosed in the United States every year, and about 100,000 have pure Gleason 3 plus 3, a form of prostate cancer that definitely should be watched, not treated.
Does Gleason 6 ever metastasize at all, or would it have to be a different type of cancer in order for there to be metastasis?
It has to be a different type of cancer. Large studies have looked over years for the incidence of cancer relapses after men treated for 3 plus 3. No one ever has relapses unless there was a higher grade cancer somewhere.
Some questions that I've seen in the comments section are things like, okay, if we have a lot of cores positive, is that really dangerous?
If it's pure 3 plus 3, it's not really dangerous. If there are higher grades present, then the possibility of future metastasis is going to go up. The larger the tumor and the higher the grade.
Then we talk about when you look at these cores or you get these samples back, there's like 5% 4 or 80% 4. So can you talk about the percentage of positive tissue in each core? And then, how does that really matter? Is 4 4, or does that number that there's 80% there really matter versus 5?
Well, the percentage matters for 2 reasons. One is how much high grade disease is present. So if you have 3 plus 4 and it's 5% grade 4, that's probably inconsequential. It's such a small amount of 4. In that sense, the percentage matters. The other issue is if you have larger and larger percentages of grade 4 or 5, the type that can metastasize, those higher grade lesions become more consequential when there's larger and larger amounts.
So it's not just the percentage of cores, but it's also how many cores are positive within how many were taken. So if I'm a patient and I have Gleason 4 present present, and, let's say 75% of those cores that were taken all had 4 of them to varying degrees, that's a more serious situation than somebody who has had, maybe 50% and there's some 3 present and there's some 4. So it really does matter the type.
Yes, the whole game in selecting treatment for prostate cancer is getting an accurate read on the statistical possibility of metastasis. I was going to say the word spread, but there's a lot of confusion around the implications of something that's spreading through the edge of the prostate, so-called capsular involvement. Capsular involvement has not been associated with a higher risk of metastasis. Metastasis means getting into the bloodstream or the lymph and jumping to a lymph node or jumping to the bones. Very serious development, of course. Spread through the edge of the prostate has not been associated with a higher incidence of metastasis. So even though it's spreading through the edge of the gland, which sounds dreadful, those men are still very curable. It's much more dependent on the size of the tumor and the grade of the tumor than whether or not it spreads through the edge of the tumor.
So can cores positive tell you the size of the tumor?
Yeah, I think that was, before we had MRIs, that was the only way to tell the size. And in that era, random biopsies where they stick you 12 times in a sort of spaced out pattern would give a good sense of how large the spot was. And this is prognostic information about the future risk of metastasis.
What about people who have multiple lesions on their prostate and there's multiple tumors and they're getting different biopsy results from different spots? How does that affect? Is it still the type of prostate cancer matters, or is it because there's more than one spot that they're biopsying? Does that make it more aggressive?
Doctors are taught to counsel their patients based on the worst spot. What's the Gleason score of that spot, and how many cores are associated with that particular spot? If there's a second spot with a lower grade, it's generally ignored as a contributor to the future risk of metastasis.
When you look at tissue samples that come back, we always talk about second opinions. And so should there be a second opinion on a biopsy, result all the time? Should we make sure that somebody else is looking at this tissue? Because what if they come back and they say, oh, there's less 4 present or there's more 4 present in some of these particular cores? Does that make a big impact not only on the treatment but on survival?
The assignment of grade, in my mind, is the number 2 most important factor in trying to ascertain whether there are metastasis or there will be metastasis in the future. The number 1 thing I rely upon are these PSMA PET scans, and the number 3 would be the size of the tumor. Accurately assigning the correct Gleason score is a critically important step, and large academic institutions generally have good pathology departments, but whenever there's a doubt, you don't need to be rebiopsied. Just have the slides from the original biopsy sent to a reference center, and at that center they can confirm or refute what the initial doctors were saying.
Is there a time frame that you would need to get those looked at? Does that pathology slide only last for a certain amount of time?
They're legally bound to hold them for 8 to 10 years.
And they're still good like that, 8 to 10 years.
They are.
When it comes to cores positive in these percentages, when I talk to patients and we're going over their, information in that first conversation, there's a big difference between a 5% for in a core and 80%. So how do you talk to patients in dealing with their concerns, and does that change the treatment pattern if the percentage is higher within that core?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There are types of patients who have 3 plus 4 with very minimal amounts of 4, and those individuals are candidates for active surveillance. As the amount of 4 goes up, then some form of definitive therapy to eradicate it before it metastasizes, to cure it, makes sense. And then as you get higher and higher amounts of grade 4 or even grade 5, then other supplementary treatments, maybe hormonal therapy, empiric radiation therapy to the pelvic lymph nodes as a precaution against any microscopic spread should also be considered. So this is the basis of deciding how intense the treatment needs to be.
If you have a situation where you have had a random biopsy and you only had like 1 core positive, but you're concerned that something was missed, what do you do next? As far as that next process goes, to make sure that we really know that where the cancer is and it's being taken care of.
Probably start with a high-quality multiparametric MRI of the prostate.
So there's a big conversation about PSMA scans because we talk about them so often, and why not do a PSMA scan instead of an MRI? Can you talk about the relevance of MRI with the prostate versus PSMA?
Well, PSMA is superior to MRI for determining the presence or absence of any metastasis in lymph nodes or bone. MRI is superior to PSMA for delineating and refining the information about what's going on inside the prostate.
Do digital rectal exams have a place with the, the hopefully targeted biopsy plus the MRI, and then does a DRE kind of help in any way that you can feel the bump, or is that something that isn't necessary at that point?
I'm not doing very many DREs now that we're getting MRIs in practically every patient, but in men who are not being scanned, it's a useful way to make sure something obvious isn't being missed.
And for those patients where it comes back as a lot of cores positive, and it is those higher grades where they are seeing the 4s and the 5s and they are coming out with Gleason 9, or in, not as many cases come back as 10, it's not as prevalent, but there are definitively cases that do. How do you talk to them and counsel them, especially with the anxiety that they would feel knowing that they came back as with a higher grade of prostate cancer?
Well, these PSMA PET scans have really changed the landscape. In the past, we were never quite certain as to whether there was any metastasis, but now we can look. Higher grade lesions have a greater propensity for metastasis, but there's no guarantee that they'll metastasize. So a lot of men have localized disease. They'll come to see us with Gleason 9 or 10. They've been screened on a regular basis. We're catching it at a fairly early stage, and these men have high-grade prostate cancer inside their prostate, but they don't have any spread outside, and they can be cured with standard forms of radiation.
So you talked about that, with the prostate cancer coming more towards the edge of the capsule, that, it isn't necessarily mean that there's a higher chance of metastasis. But what about in situations where you have seminal vesicle invasion or it's gone to the lymph nodes? Do they biopsy those as well?
On occasion, patients are biopsied for some ambiguous lymph node status to try and ascertain is it really cancer or not. But often with PSMA PET scans, which can light up brightly right in the lymph node, there's no ambiguity at all. The presence of a stage D1 or pelvic lymph node metastasis is unequivocal after you have a PET scan that shows it.
So with random needle biopsies being the mainstream biopsy type, we don't see targeted biopsies being done in a lot of local practices and urology practices, and there's thousands of urologists that are doing random needle biopsies in the US and around the world. For patients who have already had that done, since that's already been done, they don't need to go get another biopsy to confirm, or, what is the next steps for them? Because since that is the normal process, the reason you're talking about targeted biopsies is because you want, less needles, less risk of infection, less discomfort for the patient. And so there's a big benefit to targeted. But for those men who do have random needle biopsies, what is your advice to them?
Well, it may be sufficient. There are cases, and it's been well demonstrated, that random needle biopsies miss cancer about 20% of the time, usually because they're sampling the back half of the prostate next to the rectum and not the front half. The men who have had an MRI showing an anterior lesion, those men, even though they've had a random biopsy, it's possible that the needles didn't sample that lesion in the front of the prostate. So those individuals may still need a targeted biopsy, even though they already had a random biopsy. If the MRI shows that the tumor is toward the back of the gland and the pattern of biopsies matches what's being visualized on the MRI, they can get by without doing a targeted biopsy. They already have the biopsy information they need. It's on a case-by-case basis, and you have to think it through a little bit in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. The whole idea, I think, is even though you've had a random biopsy, you should still get a multiparametric MRI to make sure that nothing was missed.
If you get a biopsy result back and you see that there are multiple cores positive and you see some 4 present and you are concerned and you have those higher percentages, I just want to encourage you. There are a lot of treatments for prostate cancer. Prostate cancer is one of the slowest growing cancers, and even in advanced settings where you do have those higher numbers present, some of the biggest, best doctors at the highest universities have said, you still have months. Based off statistics and studies, you still have months to decide what you want to do. And so it's not something that you need to rush into right away unless you're in a very, very advanced state with a lot of metastatic activity and you're trying to deal with pain and side effects. But a lot of times, especially if the cancer is localized, you do have time in these situations. And so there are a lot of treatments. It's not just one. There are a ton. As far as hormone therapies, there's immunotherapy in the market. There's all sorts of chemotherapies and combinations thereof. There's a lot that they can do as far as the sequencing. And even when you look at the different types of hormone therapies that they talk about, the average duration of time that we see men have, an effect of a first-generation hormone therapy like Lupron or something, in a lot of the studies was 13 years. And so a lot of times these treatments can keep keep prostate cancer at bay for quite a while. So if you're newly diagnosed and you're in a situation where you are just somebody who has a lot of concern and those higher numbers like 4s or 5s are present and you have a higher Gleason score of an 8, 9, or a 10, I just want to encourage you. This is not a death sentence. This is something where a lot of times prostate cancer is treated like a chronic disease. You get the PSA and the cancer under control, and then you do something else when the next treatment isn't working, and then something else, and you just create a game plan for what treatment you need to take, what would best work to control the cancer, can you get a cure, and if you can't get a cure, what treatments will work in order to continue to keep that prostate cancer at bay. I know so many men, thousands, tens of thousands I've probably met over 10 years in prostate cancer that have lived decades with prostate cancer. Some of those men are good friends of mine, like John Sharon and Jonathan Levy, and they are on our helpline, and you can visit them through email or through phone at pcri.org/helpline, learn more about their stories. But they have been diagnosed 20 years ago, and they can talk about their experiences with you. Also, I would encourage the men who have already been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Maybe you're watching this video to support PCRI. I would encourage you to leave your story in the comment section so that other men can hear and realize that even with Gleason 8, 9, and 10, there is such a long life ahead. And really, it's important because there's such a long life ahead to focus on quality of life. Do not have a treatment that you don't know the side effects about, you don't know what's going to go happen to you, and you don't know about the long-term versus the short-term side effects. It is important to know what is ahead of you because prostate cancer in general is slow growing because there are so many treatments. You want to make sure that if you do get a treatment and there are long-term side effects, that doesn't affect your quality of life to a point of making you miserable. You want to make sure you know what's happening to you and that you're fully informed. It is your body, it is precious, you are worthy, you are important, and we want to make sure that you remember that even as you are just diagnosed, because we want to make sure that you know not only is there hope, not only are there treatments, not only are there men who are living decades with prostate cancer and they have a good quality of life, but there's a lot of information out there and a lot of people willing to help. And a lot of those people are the PCRI subscribers. So again, please leave your stories and comments in this video because it can be incredibly helpful to newly diagnosed patients or patients who are about to be diagnosed with prostate cancer. So again, please remember you're not alone. Reach out to us at pcri.org. Our website is full of information. And if this video was helpful for you, go ahead and leave a thumbs up and subscribe and help support other prostate cancer patients who need this information all around the world.